Let me already start introducing this webinar today while people are probably jumping in. Welcome everyone. So this is a Common Future Conversations webinar on young people's ideas for climate adaptation. Adaptation involves working to protect communities from the consequences of climate change, whether that's floods, fires, hotter weather. I'm glad that we're having this discussion today with great speakers. But before, let me quickly introduce the concept of the Common Future Conversations, if that's not familiar to you already. So this is a flagship Chatham House project centered on bringing together young people from Africa and Europe for discussions of important topics to discuss solutions. And this event is a conclusion of an 8-week-long discussion on climate adaptation. So 3 CFC members, meaning Common Future Conversation members, will present their policy ideas to a panel of policymakers, and there will be a feedback and discussion of their ideas. And if there's time, we'll also take up some questions from the audience to our panel. So let me say welcome to our audience. These are Common Future Conversation community members, Chatham House members, and all of the participants who are participating through Zoom or joining through Facebook Live. Nice to have you all today with us. My name is Sivim. I'm a policy officer at the Climate Department of the European Commission. And in my free time, I share energy and climate briefings on my social media called EU Green Deal Brave. So let me start by introducing the speakers. We have 3 great speakers today. Starting off with Omina. Omina is the first youth envoy to the president of the UN's 27th Climate Change Conference, so the COP27, and a medical doctor at the Ain Shams University Hospital, a member of the Youth Sounding Board of the European Commission, so nice meeting you, Omina, and a commissioner at the Lancet Chatham House Commission on post-COVID planetary health. Nice to have you here. Hassan Moulid Yassin is the co-founder and executive director of the Somali Greenpeace Association, which is the umbrella organization for the community-level associations working on environmental issues. So he also has a Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance activities in Somalia. Hassan, great to have you here with us today. And Juri Janati is a climate change specialist for the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, so the UNFCCC, based at the Regional Collaboration Center, Kampala. He works closely with the topics related to climate change migration nexus, climate action transparency, private sector engagement in climate action, and carbon markets. I think we have a great panel today. And before I give you the floor, let me do some housekeeping. This meeting will be on record and is being recorded. So all participants will be muted during the presentations, but you'll be able to use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to ask questions. And if we have time towards the end of this webinar, I'll take up questions from the chat. Apologies in advance if you are not able to ask your questions in time. And with that, let me give the floor to Omina. You have about 4 minutes to make your initial remarks.
Perfect. So hello, everyone. Greetings from Montreal. Now there's another COP happening, which is COP15. But I'm really happy to be with you today to listen to the ideas of the young climate innovators and champions for adaptation, which is one of the main priorities that we had as the COP27 presidency. So this is the first time a presidency of the UN Climate Change Conference creates a position for a youth envoy. And the idea that we had is to really bring in the perspectives, the solutions, and the demands of youth directly into the work of the presidency, which facilitates the negotiation process and the broader climate decision-making procedures. What I did since my appointment is first listen to young people through diverse consultations across, starting from the Africa Climate Week by the UNFCCC in Gabon. We had around 100 African youth. And then in New York, on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly, we had more young people from around the world sharing the challenges, but also the demands that they want to have a meaningful participation at the conference and really transform the way young people are heard and our perspectives integrated to guide the negotiation process. One of the key outcomes I'd love to share specifically for adaptation is that for the first time, we had a youth climate forum, which was a series of roundtable, high-level discussions. We invited ministers, chairs of country groups, including the group of G77 in China, and the AOSIS, which is the small state islands country group negotiators. And we had them sitting at the same table as young practitioners and experts. We had one on adaptation and loss and damage and resilience. And we had the key takeaways translated by myself and the UN Youth Constituency, Yongo, to the presidency and to the negotiators to take it into their recommendations and into their work for the adaptation agenda. And this COP was very critical, and another milestone took place. For the first time, we had a children and youth pavilion, which was an independent youth-led space. And we had many discussions and sessions where we invited the policymakers to come to us and co-create solutions together, including some of the prominent sessions was one on the Youth Adapt Challenge that had the young innovators and winners for this incubator that was funded by the African Development Bank. And there were many other interesting demonstrations of the youth-led solutions on the ground and the means to translate them into the COP policy making. For adaptation in general, this COP was also very important because we had the discussions around the global goal on adaptation. And this is important because for many years, I think almost 5 to 6 years, adaptation and the global goal on adaptation was not on the COP agenda. But like loss and damage in Egypt, we wanted to bring in adaptation at the forefront and get the necessary financing that it needs, which was really lagging, and there was more focus on mitigation. But then at COP27, we wanted to really bring in attention towards adaptation, especially for the countries that are most affected, but the least contributors to the effects or to the carbon emissions leading to the impacts of climate change. And it was agreed this COP that we have a framework for moving towards the global goal on adaptation, and it will be finalized through a couple of remaining workshops from the Sharm el-Sheikh Glasgow adaptation program. So it's very important to look for the timings of when these workshops are going to take place and participate in them, especially as young leaders and innovators from the ground. And then the second thing is that COP28 is also a critical next step, because then the framework will be finally adopted, and then it is on us as young people to be the implementers of the agreed targets. And another thing, and this is my final call to action that we are also working towards, is adaptation finance, and not just from the government but also from the private sector, because we had the ambition of doubling the fund needed for adaptation, and we need to be persistent as youth to really push for that, for the resource mobilization for implementing adaptation plans and integrating it across all sectors. But also it's important for us as young leaders to find ways to get this finance as well for the solutions that we are doing on the ground that have such a tremendous potential to really cater to the needs of our communities, because we work with them and we understand that, and we develop solutions based on our interactions and based on the needs of our people, and we see how it affects also our health. So I'm really looking forward to the speakers, to the presentations, and to the interaction that we're going to have. My term as the Envoy is a 1-year term, so I'm also there for you until the end or the start of COP28 and the end of our presidency, to really work together, especially for the agenda that we have such a strong input to, and a critical role to transform and to really bring in adaptation at the forefront of the climate agenda. So thank you.
Thanks, Omina, for your contribution. It's great that at these high-level political forums like the UN and COP, etc., these youth positions are being created, and it's even greater to see to have women like you representing the youth voice. I give the floor to Hassan. Would you like to give your contributions?
Dear colleagues and dear participants, may peace be upon to all of you. My name is Hassan Yassi, currently based in Somalia, working as the Executive Director of Somali Climate Association. It's clear that impact of climate adaptation or the lack of taking action is causing more significant loss and damage to our communities. And it's rather than when we take the required actions that we reduce those amount of losses, and those actions that we are taking now are more cheaper than the actions that we take when the disasters of climate change has already occurred. In our perspectives, I would like to see how are we approaching for the climate adaptation to take place, or how is our community adapting to climate change. It's not all about adaptation, but it's about how are we adopting, which methodologies are we using, or which cost effectively. We don't have but what we are doing is about raising. Can you hear me, Kevin?
Yeah, Hassan, you were gone
Uh,
for the last 10 seconds, so maybe you can repeat your last point.
yes, I said our approach of adaptation is about raising awareness of our community through climate action empowerment. For example, yeah, there's a clear example in 2021. There was a flood areas in our district. Properties have been destroyed, lives of humans have been claimed. But after we raised several awareness about climate adaptation, on 2022, the same area occurred those floods themselves. When they prepared themselves, they have raised their green. Then when the flood came this year, their properties were saved, no lives were lost. So that's how the adaptation through locally led is working. And we took some pictures that is as a result of when you raise the community also take that chances to prevent loss and damage from themselves. The other thing is about uh, reduction or advocate for emission reduction to reduce effects of climate change, because we can't keep on adapting the climate change while others are continuing emitting or causing more carbon emissions to go to the atmosphere, so that causing more climate disasters. So the adaptation should occur in both hands. As you go in adapting, also the developed, the industrialized countries should reduce their emissions as agreed to the Paris Agreement.
Yeah. Hassan, I'll take it from here. You'll have the chance to make your
Uh,
points in a second as well. We're losing you a little bit. So
can you hear me?
uh, but your point on local action to towards adaptation is a really good one. Thanks a lot for your contribution. It's been a bit difficult. It's a difficulty and a beauty at the same time because we're chipping in from various parts of the world. But with that, I would like to give the floor to Yuri.
Hey, thank you, Sevim, and thank you for having me over here. Uh, I'll give a special thank you to the special envoy on youth, Omnia, that did an excellent job going towards COP and having COP, and I think it's a very exciting time for the youth space, that there is finally a larger space to have these communications and have actual dialogue between different parties. But so I'm based in Kampala and I work with 19 countries in Eastern and Southern Africa. And very specific thing to our region is that it's 80% of the companies are small and medium enterprises. 80% is agriculture. Most of that is rain-fed agriculture. So these are all actors and livelihoods that have very hard time climate proofing their actions and climate proofing their business and livelihoods. So that is the key issue that we wrestle, because that is the welfare and that is the difficulty we have. We always talk about these large sums of money, hundreds of millions, but the question is that a lot of the people here in our region actually are looking for quite a lot smaller amounts of money that would already make a drastic change to their lives and to the safety of their communities. So that is a key area on how we can move money to smaller pieces so that the frontline communities can benefit from the climate adaptation finances. The key area is definitely sudden onset events, so floods and droughts. that affect the region. It's difficult to uncouple these from environmental degradation that might come from charcoal production and so on. So I don't like to make a very drastic separation between what is climate change and what is degradation. It's very difficult one to make, but adaptation will help anyhow, because climate crises or disasters are usually only disasters if you are not prepared to it. Many of the environmental, be it droughts, with a better adaptation, with a better preparation, there's a better chance that it has a lower impact. And what I've actually worked with Hassan earlier is the climate change migration, which is already the leading cause for migration in the region. So these are the sort of adaptation issues that are very central to the region in Eastern and Southern Africa. And then how we try to, as an organization, look at this. So there is a UNFCCC process or a policy document called National Adaptation Plans. And these are sort of the high-level documents, but they give the grand vision. So this is something that everybody can anchor their actions towards. So if it's an NGO or a local actor, the National Adaptation Plan gives the idea of where the country wants to go as a whole. And this way, when everybody looks at the goals, they can really tag into it and move forwards as a whole. And this is something that we try to support countries with, creating these grand visions, but also support with knowledge production so that there can be evidence-based policy, and also support with the policy cohesion. So often there's an issue that the adaptation policy might be good on paper, but then different parts of the different arms do different things, so it doesn't work as well. So what I really look forward to, and I'm really happy to be here, I've had a little bit of a teaser already on the policy recommendations, but the value that I want to bring in is that I do believe that the people facing the problems on a daily basis are always the best position to come up with the solutions. So what Hassan was saying about the locally led ways of going forwards. But what is a key is to have a structural changes so that those communities also have the resources, that they have the finances, that they can actually execute these solutions. What we hope to also do then as a regional collaboration center is to be able to collect these solutions and then be able to share these best practices. So that is all from me for now, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from the exciting youth solutions. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Yuri. Really, really interesting. And we have a great panel here, and I'm looking forward to your feedback on the ideas. Omina, for you from the political level, Hassan, you just mentioned the localist perspective, the localism, and Yuri from the tool systematic perspective. So looking forward to your contributions in a second. But with that, let me invite each CFC speaker to present their idea. You have 3 to 4 minutes to present. And after each idea, I would invite the panelists back on to comment and deliver your thoughts and feedback on the ideas. So I'm really looking forward to give the floor to Arthur. You are a research assistant at Berner Fachhochschule and a member of the OECD Youth Advisory Board as well. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Sorry, Fiona, can you share my slide? Thank you very much. So yes, as mentioned, my name is Arthur Therion, and my idea is, well, you can see it there, road water harvesting in semi-arid regions. The aim of this idea is pretty simple. It's to switch the script on the current relationship between water and roads, turning it from one of just management to avoid erosion or damage to one with benefits regarding climate adaptation. This by strengthening water supply and access via harvesting it from the road and its kind of surrounding area in these semi-arid regions. Regions that are characterized by low water supply and often short, intense rainfall. This could be quite of a significant impact due to the sheer number of roads that are being built in developing countries in the coming decades. Very countries that are often the most at risk, let's say, of climate change. Next slide, please. Okay, so on this slide, we see an example of kind of how a simple mitre drain system can be used for water management. So this is just one of many different systems that could be implemented. So 2 key points to note before I explain the system in more detail. Firstly, this is a form of design integrated within the landscape, and thus it requires local knowledge and stakeholder buy-in from conception to maintenance. So that kind of indispensable local knowledge that I, being based in Switzerland, cannot bring. Secondly, I've chosen to focus only on kind of low-tech options, as I believe these are more scalable to developing regions, especially the rural areas within them. And also this allows deployment without big contracts, leaving less room for corruption and other negative impacts, let's say. Now, the differing systems. So on the left, we see the kind of current paradigm of management. So this is kind of, here the water is diverted to a less critical area and its velocity, and therefore its power is reduced by flowing through obstacles, in this case, just small rocks. This would be the kind of go-to system if a more complex water utilization system is not viable. So kind of the current paradigm. Now on the right, from top to bottom, we see differing ways, systems that utilize the water. So on the top, we see the water concentrated and then used for crop irrigation. Pictured here is a cascade irrigation system. It should be noted this would be very water quality dependent. In the middle, we see it concentrated to allow vegetation planting. This could have multiple co-benefits, including increasing soil binding, runoff management, shielding areas from dust, and also generating resources, i.e. wood. Finally, at the bottom, we see it concentrated both for storage and groundwater recharge. The latter is often not favored by intense runoff scenarios where the dry soil kind of does not have time to soak up the water, and kind of dry soil has quite negative impacts on soil stability. So this could kind of improve the resilience of the system. So as mentioned, all these systems have water quality and wildlife management issues, for example, contaminants from local industry or like mosquitoes or other wildlife. That could be an issue. Thus, this is where the local stakeholder knowledge is essential to designed around any particular constraints within that area. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Arthur, for a very concise and very practical solution. I would like to give the floor first to Omina, then Hassan, and then Yui for your reflections. Omina? Otherwise, until Omina can chip in, Hassan, are you? Does the internet connection work better?
Yes, I think so. Can you hear me?
Yes, sure.
Thanks, Ala, for the presentation and the quicker one. When you just mentioned water harvesting, it just came to my mind on water catchment issues. Uh, as we go for your presentation, maybe how can we this one localize? For example, in our system, like in Somalia, uh, people used traditionally, they were more resilient. They used to have a catchment, water catchment system called the Bargat system. Although during the rainy season, is no water used to escape. All those water used to go to one bargains, and later on those water to be resold and used as other purposes. Especially, I remember a place called Galkai where groundwater is very hard that people cannot use as consumption or drink it, but they used to have that catchment process. But now, as people are urbanizing, they are shifting from the traditional ways, and that one is also causing more vulnerable to the climate change issues. So how can this thing we put practically in our local communities? And remember, building that uh, water catchment systems through households is not a cheaper process. So how can we, instead of just as a documentation, how can we put practically? That means how can we get the climate adaptation financing into local communities? Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Hassan. Definitely, Arthur, something to take on board. Omnia.
Yes, so thank you for your presentation. There are two things that I really loved. The first is how you focus on the technology and how variable it can be from low to high tech, which makes it more scalable, especially in developing countries. And it's also important to think about, even if we introduce a high technology or a more advanced way, how to also have elements of building the capacity of those who would like to adopt this solution and to be able to independently do it in their own contexts and their countries. Because, sometimes the advanced technology can be more efficient and effective and can really serve when it comes to the conservation of water and its utilization. The second thing I also would like to highlight, and I loved when you said the integration of local knowledge. So this is more of, thinking how working with the community is important, integrating the challenges, the perspectives, the solutions. So it's always a consultative process when we are designing a solution, especially for adaptation, because local people's knowledge and experience can be fundamental and very beneficial for the solution itself. My question and my advice at the same time, or feedback, would be, the first question I had was like, how can we, as Hassan said, like get the finance for it? But I also see that it has a lot of potential to be integrated within existing systems when we're looking at, for example, countries or certain ministries, or, look at the national planning of cities. And, even if you work on a city level or a small, and this is something very important to, like, go from local to global in a way, and see how at the very local level, if this has a good potential, then it can be integrated within the national planning and urbanization sector, and it can be adopted by the government. And if the country is not interested or don't have the finance for it, there's always the private sector who are going to be interested to take this on, and who would, who are interested in funding small-scale solutions with the different challenge competitions, incubators, and so on, because I see so like a tremendous potential in this particular solution. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for your feedback. And Yuri, can I give the floor to you? Do you have any additional remarks?
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you for the presentation. You made me do some additional homework before I came here. It's a really interesting solution, and what I really can work standalone as well. It doesn't necessarily need that much funding, because it has different aspects, especially when we're talking about rural communities, dirt roads, ditches, having the run of water spent for agriculture. These are solutions that don't actually need money, but they need a little bit of time and sanitization. So that's what I would actually recommend for you to really think of which of these multitude of uses are suitable, so that you can have a very clear spearhead of which of the technologies you want to go piloting and start sanitizing a community or seeing is there a buy-in, because only after that you can have capacity building. You always need to have a community buy-in when the solution doesn't come from the community per se. So I would think that for me, the low-hanging fruit is the agricultural. It's the huge part of the semi-arid region. Here, it's a massive part of the resilience for food security, for just human well-being. So I would look at that, and I would think that those rural communities are the easiest, because it doesn't need additional sort of communication, and that would help scale the solution and then be able to develop the other parts and look at to the different solutions. But thank you very much. It was very interesting.
Thanks a lot for all the reactions, and thanks, Atta, for your presentation. Shaheen, I would like to give the floor to you. So Shaheen Banon Berhari, you are a senior learning experience designer, and you're associated to the African Leadership University. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So thank you for having me today. And I see that John put a question in the chat about how all of this leads back to education. So I hope you in particular, if you're still listening, will enjoy my solution proposal. So it's called The Final Hour, Mainstreaming Contextualized Climate Curricula. When it comes to climate change, we're down to the wire, but everyone here already knows that. Our collective present is mired in a mess of threadbare social safety nets and global supply chains hurting from the COVID-19 pandemic and the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Jobs and food supplies are drying up across Central and South Asia, Climate-induced droughts and famine are swallowing southern Madagascar and the Horn of Africa. All the while, decades of displaced peoples continue to drown off the coasts of European shores. Displacement, insecurity, and ambiguity are the zeitgeist of our generation, not a state of exception. Clearly, something is very wrong, and many things desperately need to change. The question of our final hour is whether or not we can learn to see, hear, be, and do differently while it still makes a difference. The systems shifts that we need to make must center around citizen consciousness and unleashing collective intelligences to create regenerative and sustainable futures. The idea for mainstreaming contextualized climate education is as much about critical pedagogy as it is about epistemic equity and knowledge mobilities, because it matters what concepts we use to think about concepts. In less savory terms, learning design is a thoughtful process of experimentation and engineering, where the outcome I seek to design for is collaborative determination. My present hypothesis for where policy intervention is needed is threefold. The first fold takes the form of climate education curricula that integrates adaptive leadership training and respectfully incorporates learnings from Western and Indigenous histories and sciences into the practice of awareness-based systems change for the development of conscious citizens who place value in our connected histories, collective humanity, and relationships with all living things. Conscious citizens read to redesign worlds around them. In doing so, they seek to participate in crafting inclusive futures through non-hegemonic narratives, which translates into meaningful collaboration and ethical action for the profound social and cultural transformations that are required to address complex, multidimensional planetary crises. The second fold concerns knowledge management and open access to a living repository replete with examples of place-based and grassroots innovations, which can be used to design, test, and document low-stakes practicums for students and other local actors using real-world examples. The last fold involves redefining prosperity beyond the boundaries of economic growth and within the boundaries of our planet. This entails changing out existing indexes of academic and development measurement to impact frameworks anchored in values of solidarity, interdependence, stewardship, and local epistemologies. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Shireen, for your contribution. And it exactly hits one of the questions that we received on education. So I'm looking forward to the contributions from our panelists and their feedback. Omnia, I'll give the floor to you again. And we just quickly go through all the speakers. So Omnia, Hassan, and Yuri, let's keep the same rotation.
Perfect. So Shaheen, thank you so much for your presentation. I'm personally a huge advocate for climate education, and I've worked on that for over 3 years, looking at how to integrate climate change in medical curriculum as a medical student, because I see how it's important to build our capacity and understanding to adapt to climate change, but also mitigate the carbon emissions that lead to that. I have a question for you, and in general, also to guide your initiative, which is, which level are you also thinking about when it comes to climate education, and which age group? Because right now there is a lot of global movements and efforts. For example, UNICEF are working on integrating climate change in children's education and that age group. But then there are others that are working more on adolescent education. And then finally, with me and a couple of deans and different organizations like AMI, for example, the Association of Education for Europe, are also working on that on a university level. And there's also an important thing to consider is that co-creation is very important, especially for climate education. It's not about the development of curriculum by professors or educators. It's also about involving youth in the process, because it gives them a sense of leadership and motivation towards learning more and building their own capacity and understanding. It also gives them hope. It tackles mental health, because they feel more empowered with the knowledge to cope and to contribute to the climate crisis instead of being seen as simply victims and being disproportionately affected. And it's also important to consider when we're thinking of climate education, is it in a formal or a non-formal setting? Because non-formal settings are also very efficient. Curricula are very challenging to change, either on the school level or on the university level. Deans are not very flexible to integrate new knowledge, especially on climate change. So always having a combination of non-formal peer-to-peer educational programs. For example, I recently developed an online course on climate change, nutrition, and health with the European Institute of Technology, EIT, and EAT Foundation. And also thinking about providing these online, either it's like an online course, it's a webinar, even if it's a toolkit for students or young leaders to do their own workshops and sessions on climate change. This can also be considered as climate education, but also using these non-formal opportunities to then integrate climate change in formal curricula, and like having the students themselves put the pressure in transforming curricula and integrating it as, very importantly, not just a non-mandatory component, but a mandatory element in the curriculum that you need to learn and understand. So thank you again.
Yeah,
Awesome.
thanks for these great resources that you were sharing. Then Hassan, do you have any remarks?
Thank you, and thank you, Shaheen, for the great presentation about climate education, which is very crucial for our society, because it's all about informing our communities about the impacts on climate change, especially the learning institutions. And I think that's what I have pioneered for the past 5 years. I have been learning from the UNCC Climate Learning Partnership, and I was also reteaching what I have gained from there to our communities. But the challenges that we face when it comes to the learning institutions, remember that we already have some elements of environmental and climate aspect in our curriculums. But that one, it's written at the last pages of the book of those textbooks. So even it finds the teachers difficult to cover the whole syllabus. So by the time the exam is coming to near, even they will not bother teaching the last topics, which all the times those environmental and climate change issues are written. A good example now is Somalia, the new curriculum which has been developed. It contains good elements of the climate and environmental issue, but it's in the last topic. But what do we need to do is that even our teachers in the learning institutions, they don't have some of them do not have that capacity. Even they are not exposed to climate change issues. So it's also a matter of fact that we also need to capacitate our teachers so that they can convey the messages. So one of the ways that can be encouraged them is that sometimes they are also learned. What we do is that we give them the tools and the links where they can learn such climate change topic issues, such as the UN Climate Change Learning Partnership, so that they can teach themselves. And this has been working. That's why we have trained more than 2,000 young people and elders in Somalia. So I think it's something that works. Thank you. I don't have any more question for that.
Great. Thanks a lot, Hassan, for your contribution. Yuri.
Hey, thank you, Sahen. That's I always appreciate this approach of starting young, that it will be the key for the future of the action, and that's where also the pressure comes from. And I don't think that we often talk about youth as capacity receivers. Well, it's good to remember that youth are also capacity builders. So in SIDS setting, it's also a very strong place to be able to access the parents and change those behaviors at a household level. So I do appreciate that a lot as the base idea, and also combining both the technical knowledge and the values knowledge, because both of these are equally important. You need to have the value changes and the different approaches before the technical knowledge has a sort of a place to go to. SIDS are such a specific case compared to even the developing world. The supply chains are very difficult. It's even higher risks if we do have a crisis like COVID. I know that a lot of SIDS had a very difficult time of actually just having things. So it calls for even more resilience and more of being very independent on all of these subtle changes. So I do sort of echo what was already said by Hassan and Omnia, that it's very important to have that training of trainers, and having these multiple different parts. And in case of SIDS, it's also to build the knowledge base, because sometimes it's under researched and the impacts are understood as well. So what I think that a very helpful part going forward is to identify which partnerships you could start building on it, to be able to, first of all, bring the information in, have perhaps the UN organizations. I know that, for example, Mauritius has a UNDP country office there. And how can these come and support with technical data, come maybe support on the political leverage to have that political buy-in, and then move from there. And the more partnerships you have, the more sort of actors you can bring together to have a more holistic approach. Because even our last speaker, Arthur, that's a technical solution that might be helpful in the case of SIDS as well, because drinking water scarcity is going to be an issue coming in the coming years. So that sort of a partnership building should be maybe, it could be a good next step for you to take and start identifying with whom you can move and run with it. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Yuri. Really, really concrete suggestions and next steps, hints on tools. So Shaheen, I think you have clear next steps to build up on your idea. Thanks, everyone. Also keeping the time in mind, we have another 14 minutes to go. I would love to give the floor to Ekov Giete Adomensa. You're a student at a Central University in Ghana and a climate activist as well. The floor is yours.
Thank you. I hope I am very audible. I'm sorry, I'll have to keep my video off because I'm dealing with a few internet challenges. Anyway, I'll be presenting my policy proposal on preserving and adapting traditional occupations amid climate chaos. So inspired by a recent visit to a very deprived fishing community dealing with the brunt of climate change in Ghana's Pampa municipality within the Greater Accra region of Ghana. I came about with 4 main policy solutions that I thought perhaps could help fishing communities and other traditional occupations dealing with climate impacts adapt to climate change. So the first solution I came up with was adapting traditional occupations to use more sustainable equipment. And this implies that the application of circular economy principles in the manufacture of environmentally sustainable tools and equipment to enable ecologically friendly traditional occupations. Reflecting on my expedition to Deutsche and the fishing community in Pampa municipality, where these fishers are using very small boats, or what we call canoes, and these boats are powered by fossil fuels. And we know that fossil fuels cause a lot of carbon emissions and all of that. So moving on forward, our first solution to help these fishers is to actually enable them to acquire more sustainable equipment with the fishing nets as well being made out of plastics, probably using more biodegradable fishing nets in order to enable them to reduce their environmental footprint or degradation and their carbon footprint as well. Moving on to the next solution, we'll be training indigenous workers in sustainable practices that support their industries long term. An example would be to train native fishers in coral reef restoration or mangrove and seaweed cultivation or ocean management programs to enable them to help protect marine life and coastal ecosystems, considering that progressing into the future and considering we have to protect sea, marine life and wildlife as well, would have to enable these fishers, native fishers play a very key role in protecting these ecosystems. And the third policy proposal I'll be presenting today is a gradual transition of some workers paid custodians of the ecosystems that they work in. And that actually means that we consider or we are aware of the fact that some traditional occupations play a major role in driving environmental degradation. So in order to reduce their environmental footprint, or in order to enable them to play a meaningful role in the just transition or the green transition, which encompasses a broader scope of income earning jobs or livelihoods, not only linked to fossil fuels, we would actually look at helping these traditional occupations adapt to enable them to protect the environments or the communities in which they find themselves operating in. And using the example of Deutsche, the very deprived fishing community facing the brunt of climate change, will actually be to pay these fishers or these natives to protect the ecosystems that define them, that surround them, be it the ocean or be it marine life or coastal ecosystems, would actually help these native fishers or any other traditional occupations as well, being in the key point to transition them to protect the ecosystems they find themselves in. And my fourth and final policy proposal would be to youth inclusion and capacity development in the preservation of traditional occupations, not ignoring or actually acknowledging the major role that young people play in actually driving sustainable development and propelling a more carbon neutral, low carbon, climate resilient future, will actually be to enable young people or recognize the need for intergenerational synergy and collaborations between young people and chieftaincy or cultural institutions to actually enable the indigenous knowledge to be passed down to younger generations to preserve culture and also belief systems around the world, notwithstanding the fact that traditional occupations are not only income earning livelihoods, but they also play a major role in preserving belief systems, in preserving cultures, and in preserving faith as well. So considering that the just transition is going to affect all livelihoods, and it's not only going to affect net zero sectors such as fossil fuels, oil and gas, coal, and all of that, would have to ensure that these indigenous industries are preserved and play a very significant role or play a very major role in helping in propelling sustainable development and in shaping the low carbon climate resilient future that we are looking at. So I want you to know that these solutions are also applicable in other fields as well. And these fields are not just restricted to fishing, but also we have the artisan industry, we have the hunting industry, and so on. So I'd leave this here. Thank you very much. I hope you could pick that up for me. I'm really sorry, I'm dealing with some serious internet challenges. Thank you.
No, all good. It's working perfectly fine. You left the panelists with a very difficult task, namely commenting very shortly on your presentation with your 4 solutions. So I'll ask the panelists to quickly comment your main point and your main feedback to Akov, maybe picking one of the policy suggestions that he was presenting. Omnia, I'll start with you again, then Hassan, then Yuri, keeping also the time in mind.
Yes, I'll be very brief. I think I will pick 2 quick things. One important about the different, like capacity building around and the trainings that you mentioned in terms of nature conservation and restoration. I think it's so important, and linking it to youth inclusion. One thing I would add is also to, as you mentioned, it's important to utilize traditional knowledge and also, both build the capacity of youth together with the indigenous communities coming together with the solutions and, bridging the gap between Western and technology as well as traditional knowledge to really bring in both and creating effective sustainable practices. And I would also advise to see how each of your solution can be scaled up and can benefit other youth around the world who would like to also do the same, even if you start on the regional level and then going global, because your solutions are incredible, especially that they focus on building capacities. And this always has the tremendous potential to be scaled up, to be amplified, and to be transmitted either through sessions that are virtual or in person, but also through and one last thing I would really advise is to, you know, send us a link of your amazing work, because I would personally love to amplify it.
Thank you very much. I think I have that in the chat box, so I would appreciate it if you could just take a quick glance too. Thank you very much.
That's great. That's great, Amina. Hassan, what are your reflection? Maybe in your main reflection in a couple of sentences.
Thank you, Savin, and thanks my colleague for presentation his policy. Uh, Mine is about two things. One is about scalability, and the other about its implementation. We might develop solutions and we might develop policies because even we have good policies in place now. But what matters is how far are we going to implement such policies on the ground level? And second one, how is our government also adapting such policies or solutions as youth we are coming with? So keep up the good work. Maybe I hope uh, those policies now I'm going to look through again. The link has been shared and see how applicable also is in our local communities. And it depends again at the final decision how governments are also implementing such policies. Thank you.
Yuri.
All right, I'll try to keep it brief. So there were a lot of interesting parts where I could have started the commenting, but I'm gonna go with this practical theme again. So I would say that going forwards, it's important to identify specific professions because it's very difficult to find enough information and cohesion and consensus the broader you make your initiative. So it's easier to start with one specific profession and move from there. And on that topic, it divides for me at least to two parts. One is sustaining the professions, and one is part of the community having to divert from the profession. So climate risks are getting higher. Let's say a fish stock is getting depleted. Some of the people need to stop competing for the resource pool and hopefully aim to a different, less climate vulnerable profession. So there's a lot of examples on this in Mexico. They made marine protected areas. Some of the fishermen turned into scuba diving and tourism, and this also a protected area, and it replenished the fish stock, so on. So this is the policy level. You need to look at diverting and sustaining so nobody's left behind, nobody gets hurt by the intervention. But there's one part that you cannot do with policy, and that is buy-in from the local communities. So that is when you move with an initiative like that, it's very important to also sensitize, and that might be a very long process, and that's something to always keep in mind and to be patient with. So that, I hope that was a minute. Thanks.
That's great. Thanks a lot, Yuri, for your feedback as well. Again, like really practical, concrete stuff. And I hope, Akov, you can move forward with these suggestions and feedback. What I would like to do before we round off is pick up two questions from the audience that I found really interesting and connect to the presentations from the CFC members as well. Starting off with the question related to education again, but this time not towards the youth, but towards adults. So how do we educate adults about climate change? And I would like to ask this question to Omnia.
Okay, that's an amazing question. And I think that is why it's important to think about
Omnia is cutting off. Maybe I can redirect a question to Hassan then, and then I have one final question to Yuri.
Thank you, Savin. It's all about inclusivity. In every program that you are doing, it's not only designed for youth, and mostly if you find that our adults, and whom do we consider adult nowadays? We have differentiated youth are below that 5, and others are above 40 years old. And those are the people who have been either practically experiencing what has happened before and what is happening now. So they really, even if they don't know about the terms of the climate adaptation, the climate change or the adaptation or the resilience, but what they know is that what used to happen, what's happening now, and what they can predict the future. They will already tell you that there used to be a kind of tree that lived to be there, but now it's not there. They will tell you that in so and so we used to receive rainfall in that year, but nowadays we are not receiving, or they are saying we are receiving floods which did not there. So from the storage from the storage side, you can bring them on board, also telling them the new trend of climate change education or how it is already working. And when all the time when you are inviting to capacitate young people about climate education, you always need also to include elder peoples in halfway so that they also learn what other young children are also learning when it comes, because they are not going to school. It's all about this climate change education takes place in either forms of workshops or it takes in either of conferences. So that's the best opportunity to invite them so that they also learn what other young people are learning. Thank you.
That's a really, really great one. Omnia, do you have a practical example that you would compliment Hassan with?
Yes, I think for adults it's challenging, but bringing in the why. So, why should adults learn about climate change? And when you start framing climate change as a human health issue that does not just affect their own health, but also the health of their children and grandchildren, they start to understand why is it important to learn about climate change and what can adults do and their generation do on the individual level, but then on the community level. And one good example I've seen, for example, with children who were at COP, and we had a child who was 13 years old. His name was Francisco from Colombia, and he wrote his own book on climate change. And one of his greater supporters was actually his family. And here in Montreal, just yesterday, we had another child who was 11 years old, and his mom helped him to set up his own YouTube channel where he invites climate scientists from the UNFCCC and the IPCC to learn and talk to him and to children around the world about climate change. So this is where, you can bring in education through empowering the efforts of children and adolescents around climate change.
These are really inspiring examples. I need to check out the YouTube channel myself as well. The final question that I would like to take up is directed towards Yuri directly. Agnes is appreciating that you're working on a region in health from EA. As much as locally led ideas and solutions towards climate adaptation is encouraged, what do you think hinders sustainability of these solutions?
Thank you, Agnes, for the question. And so I would maybe bring 3 points here. So one, I think that what hinders is that we still have a wrong mental set towards this competition and doing work in silos. Instead, it will be very necessary for small actors to come together, not try to do every part of a certain solution by themselves, but start leaning towards the comparative and advantages that other actors might have. Maybe somebody is better at accessing climate finance and somebody is better at doing something else. But bringing these bigger groups together to have really collaborative efforts will also bring more sustainability, because when you tie everything to one person, you are at a way higher risk of the solution disappearing when that person moves away, changes jobs, etc. So moving towards from competition to collaboration is one part, and that can be done by every actor who's working in the adaptation space. Second one, I think that even though we do need more adaptation finance, what I was saying earlier, we also need to be able to get that finance into smaller units. We need to have better access, and that is a structural change that needs to happen from governments, from development partners, from banks. It needs to be also with a higher risk appetite. We need to be able to give money even to solutions that might not work out. And that's maybe my key point that I want to say when it comes to adaptation to climate change or any climate action. Don't let perfect be the enemy of the good. So if we only want to have perfectly crafted project proposals for 10-year planning, we're never going to get anywhere. We need solutions that we can do now, and maybe not 100% of them are going to work. So we need a lot more risk appetite and willingness to also just start working. And we see a lot of good solutions. For example, the roads can be changing right now somewhere by innovative volunteerism and build up the groundwork towards a policy level change. And so this is maybe where I would like to see more just willingness to start acting when you have a good idea, start piloting, doing mistakes, and then moving forwards.
what great statements to round off the session with as well, Yuri. I think that summarized really like the sentiment and the lost messaging that I wanted to share as well. Perfect being the enemy of the good is something that I also see in my work a lot, which is sometimes there should be encouraged to be taken up more. And with that, I would like to thank to all speakers and also our CFC members who presented their ideas, all the audience for listening and tuning in. Thanks for allowing us to go a little bit over time. For me, this was extremely interesting, I have to say. There are a couple of resources that have been shared from the CFC members and the panelists that I'll definitely need to forward to my colleagues here at the Commission as well. So thanks for that. I hope this was inspiring to you all. For me, it was definitely the case. And with that, I would like to round off the session. Thanks for everyone. Thanks for the Chatham House for allowing this to happen. And with that, have a great evening and enjoy.